A Russian rocket strike on a train station killed 25 people, Ukraine says, on the day marking 6 months since Moscow's invasion began. 5 of the victims of the attack in the eastern town of Chaplin burned to death in a vehicle, officials said. 2 boys aged 6 and 11 were also killed. President Volodymyr Zelensky announced the strike in the middle of a UN Security Council meeting. A further 31 people were wounded. Russia has so far made no comment. Moscow has repeatedly denied targeting civilian infrastructure. Speaking on Thursday, UN Human Rights Commissioner Michelle Bachelet called on Russia's president to halt armed attacks on Ukraine. Mr. Zelensky said he had learned of the strike on Chaplin, in the Dnipropetrovsk region, as he was preparing to speak to the Security Council, adding, "This is how Russia prepared for the UN Security Council meeting." 4 passenger carriages are on fire now. The number of fatalities could increase, he continued. In April, a strike on another train station killed more than 50 people. Ukraine has spent Wednesday marking its annual Independence Day, and Mr. Zelensky had previously said Russia might do something cruel to disrupt the celebrations. Earlier he accused Moscow's forces of turning the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant into a war zone that endangered the plant and the people of Europe, putting the world on the brink of radiation catastrophe. The UN Secretary-General told the same meeting that the senseless war could push millions of people into extreme poverty, both in Ukraine and beyond. Around the world, there were gatherings of supporters in the streets to mark Ukraine's Independence Day. World leaders also rallied to support the embattled nation. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson appeared in Kyiv on an unannounced trip to show his country's support, announcing £54 million, $63.5 million, in new military aid, a figure dwarfed by an announcement from U.S. President Joe Biden of an extra $3 billion, £2.5 billion. Messages of support arrived from across the globe. From Australia, Germany, Finland, Poland, Turkey and more. In the Vatican, Pope Francis called for concrete steps to end the war and avert the risk of a nuclear disaster at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. But in the streets of Kyiv, it was relatively quiet. Ukraine had banned large gatherings and events over fears that Russia could target such civilian gatherings. It followed a warning from the U.S. for any of its citizens to leave ahead of the anniversary. Some gathered anyway on Khreshchatyk Street to look at the array of captured Russian tanks and armored vehicles put on display instead of the usual Ukrainian parade. Between his political speeches, President Zelensky and his wife also attended a memorial ceremony for the fallen soldiers in civilians of the war, laying yellow and blue flowers at Kyiv's memory wall of fallen defenders. Earlier this week, Ukrainian officials gave their first update on military casualties in some time, saying that nearly 9,000 soldiers had been killed in the 6-month conflict, though that number cannot be independently verified. Despite the losses, the Ukrainian leader had started the day with a defiant national address, vowing to retake the whole of Ukraine, and without any concessions or compromises, and we don't know these words, they were destroyed by missiles on the 24th of February, and he said. The enemy thought we would greet them with flowers and champagne, but received wreaths and Molotov cocktails instead. In Russia, meanwhile, the day marking half a year since the start of the invasion passed quietly. The war is static, but ousting Russia is a seismic task. Ukraine war in maps. 6 months on from Russia's invasion. What weapons are being supplied to Ukraine? The BBC's Will Vernon in Moscow says there has been almost no mention of the 6 months of Russia's Inquat, special military operation Inquat, on television or from officials. Possibly a sign that authorities do not want to emphasize the drawn-out campaign. Russia had initially promised a short, decisive campaign, but Ukrainian resistance quickly pushed Russian forces away from the capital, and months later Russia redeployed its forces to concentrate on the eastern breakaway provinces where it already enjoyed support. In recent weeks, the front lines have hardly moved. One significant event in Russia on Wednesday was the arrest of Yevgeny Roizman, one of the last remaining significant opposition politicians in the country. The former mayor of Yekaterinburg was arrested on charges of Inquat, discrediting the Russian army Inquat, which since the invasion of Ukraine began can carry a prison sentence of up to 5 years. As he was led away, he said he was being arrested for saying out loud Inquat, one phrase, the invasion of Ukraine, and Quat. Thousands of people have faced the courts over such charges, with a large majority found guilty, human rights lawyers say. One human rights group, OVD Info, says more than 16,000 people have been detained for protesting against the invasion, offenses which include street protests, social media posts, or simply referring to Russia's Inquat, special military operation Inquat, as a war or an invasion.